Hash Rate is sponsored by Ledger. With the announcement of Ledger Flex and Ledger Stacks, Ledger gives you the best security on the planet for your crypto and identity. Ledger Flex and Stacks drive an e-ink screen with the same secure chip that's in your credit card and passport, except instead of protecting the secrets of banks and governments, Ledger protects your secrets and your private keys. Ledger supports Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and more than 200 other tokens. The secure touchscreen, plus the Ledger Live app, means that whether you're buying your very first Bitcoin or doing your 2000 swap, you can do it securely and easily with your Ledger. And as always, use my link, shop.ledger.com/hashrate in the show notes to get the very best price whenever you buy a Ledger Flex or Stacks. And BAMP.FI's NUSD. NUSD is the Bitcoin dollar. Now you can hold dollars directly in your Bitcoin wallet on the Bitcoin chain. Swap between native Bitcoin and NUSD using just a Bitcoin wallet. No bridges, wrap coins, or centralized exchanges required. On the BAMP.FI website, you can swap NUSD with Tether and Athena's USDE, so there are easy ways in and out for you Ethereum people. NUSD is already supported by major Bitcoin DeFi protocols like DotSwap, and more added every day. Go to BAMP.FI to start your NUSD journey today. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. My guest today is Mog Machine, today representing Subnet 19 in the BitTensor Decentralized AI Network. Now, for those who don't know, BitTensor is decentralized AI, and it's divided up into 45 subnets, each of which is focused on solving a specific AI problem. So, Mog, you're here today because Subnet 19 has some big news, right? So tell us all about that.
Well, it's interesting you should say that. I'm actually often, this is probably one of the first times I would actually represent Subnet 19. Subnet 19 is created by Namare on BitTensor. And what I would actually probably prefer to be wearing still my TAU stats validator and guider of growth of network hat. And I would say more leaning on Subnet 19 as an example of where we want to take the network. So rather than being a sort of a representative of Subnet 19, it ends up being a very, very clear example of where we're trying to take the network, and how we are trying to essentially grow by continually standing on the shoulders of those who are pushing the network forward. And I think Subnet 19 at the moment is standing head and shoulders above other subnets for ticking boxes in what's really required to take BitTensor to the next level. And it's very much inference-based, but what it's managed to do is essentially combine the power of what could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 subnets into a single subnet and reach a point where the balance between incentivizing the required outputs and incentivizing the growth of the productivity of miners towards real-world organic usage and growth of organic usage has been achieved. Now, that sounds all a bit complex, so let's take a step back and break it down a little bit. What it means to make a subnet, because that's what a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, so let me just sort of repeat back to you what I think I heard you say, and I've listened to some other podcasts about what I've heard Namare speak about what they did, and the thing to understand here is that starting a subnet, it's kind of hard. You have to have a bunch of TAU, you have to stake it. It's a decent sized effort, and once you get there, you're sort of locked into doing one specific AI problem, or at least that's the way it's been. What Namare did was figure out a way to sort of create, his own little mini BitTensor with multiple subnets, if you will. And I use that in air quotes, within his one subnet, and taking that template and making that available to all the other subnets is sort of what's exciting here. Did I get that right?
Yes, in some elements. Let's take it back to making a subnet. on BitTensor. What BitTensor is, in essence, is incentivized distributed compute, which obviously lends itself towards machine intelligence. Actually, it can be used in a non-AI way if you can find a constructive way to generate value with distributed compute. But let's think of it as it's an arbitrary number, but in this instance, 256 slots on a network where 20 or so will be filled by validators and the other 230 will be filled by participants who you want to do something in a way that benefits you more than if you were trying to do it yourself, trying to do it in-house, and having them compete to achieve that goal is going to essentially grow the value of the commodity that you're producing. So the first thing we have, it's kind of like looking at crypto, isn't it? Very often we go, here's a distributed ledger or blockchain. It does this and this and this and this, and it's going to fundamentally change society. So here's a problem that didn't really exist that we can kind of put on here, and you should be excited about it. But the reality is we sit there and going, but could we just do that with a database? Like, does it need to be? Are we creating problems that don't quite need to be solved? So the first thing that happens is, of course, what is the problem that you're solving? What are you trying to achieve? What is a commodity that you're trying to make? And I have to say, in defense, obviously, it's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of our understanding is inference. LLMs, image models, text to speech, speech to text, sending off a prompt and receiving a response. That's the lowest hanging fruit and the easiest one to understand. I don't want to take away from other subnets who are doing much more complex structures such as training models, fine-tuning models, going into sort of scientific research, and performing things that often I have to struggle to understand in order to assess their value.
Yeah.
But in this particular instance, what 19 is doing, or a lot of what they're doing, if we break it out into modules, which I'll come to in a minute, can be applied to all of these subnets. Not everything. So I'll try and point out that difference. So the first thing you've got is your problem. And your problem in terms of inference is, how do we get responses from miners? That's what I want to do. I've got 256 miners, and I want to have them respond to my queries, and I want to incentivize them to respond and to do better. So the initial usage of this was not Subnet 19, it was 18. And 18 said, well, hold on a minute. We want to just make sure that they're giving good responses, incentivize them to give good responses, and reward them accordingly. Because at that time in BitTensor, it wasn't quite working in an optimal way. And so we removed completely the concern about where the responses were coming from and said, well, just use GPT or OpenAI API keys. And 18 still does this. You can essentially...
so the miners are actually just using OpenAI as...
Correct.
And then just
You're decentralizing the centralized. You're allowing people to arbitrage the value of their enterprise keys. You're providing access where it may be restricted, unrestricted access. And essentially, you're providing 230 times the power of a single enterprise-grade key.
Okay.
But what 19 then started to do, and originally it started with images, because unfortunately there was an image subnet on BitTensor that wasn't able to construct an incentive mechanism that worked, and it died essentially. It's lost its emissions. People had no confidence.
So by vision, you mean like computer vision, where the AI looks at a room and knows that
vision this is where it gets
model.
even more confusing.
Okay.
Vision is the name of Subnet 19. Cortex is 18. Its vision is 19. And originally it was only doing images, and now it does so much more. It's called DTOW vision, with a U. All these naming things, you sort of start naming things, and at the beginning it's a good idea, and 6 or 8 months down the line you think, are people confused by this? But it is essentially the vision of what a BitTensor subnet can be. So the first problem was quite simply, we need to incentivize miners with, and the vision behind 19 is decentralized and open source, with no compromise on that. At every single step of the way, even if something is harder, it has to be prioritized, full decentralization. So when building a subnet, the first thing you have to do is to design an incentive mechanism. And the first incentive mechanism you design is essentially will be around what we call synthetic data. Questions or incentive for the miners to perform a task that you devise, that you say as a subnet owner, right, this is what I want to achieve. This is what I want the miners to do. And this is what the action I want them to perform. And these are the instructions or task or prompt that I'm going to give them to perform this task. And I'm then going to judge them, the rewards mechanism, the rewards part of it. I'm then going to judge them based on the criteria that I've specified and reward them and rank them accordingly. That's the first initial part of designing a subnet, and very hard to get right. Designing an incentive mechanism is completely unlike anything else, definitely in the blockchain space. It works in some human spaces. There have been times where we've thrown out problems to closed circles of PhD mathematicians who, without telling them exactly how the problem or the solution is being used to allow solutions to be come up with. So it's not something that is inherently people have experience with. And yet at the same time, we're trying to attract talent into the BitTensor network to design these incentive mechanisms. And it can come from the strangest places. You don't have to be an AIML engineer to be able to come up with an ingenious method for an incentive mechanism.
And when you're coming up with these incentive mechanisms, the tests that the validators perform, the responses, it's somewhat subjective, isn't it? Right? Because you're trying to judge, like, what is the better AI response? And right, so I think you and I might disagree based on, I might think this response is better than you, and you think the other one is better. So how do you sort of like? It's difficult in that sense, right? It's non-deterministic.
Well, if I can, let's say from an image point of view, if I can confirm you are running a model and you are running the model that I want you to, and I know you're running that model and I can prove that you're running that model, then I know that the response is from that, and I can check the response to make sure that it is valid. There has to be an element of faith in that sense, I believe. It's not faith, but in terms of logic, that you are returning an image from that model. So obviously it depends on the prompt. We can also compare, because within a synthetic, if we know the query, then we can obviously measure the response against our own querying of that query. And then it becomes also about speed and volume and capacity. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the first thing you need to do is to have this incentive mechanism, and it needs to work within your closed circle of your closed test data. And that's where a lot of subnets are. And they say, well, here we are. We've got this incentive mechanism, and the validator's doing it, as the miner's doing exactly what we want them to do. And that's great. And we can show, look how many questions we can ask them, or how many things we can ask them to do, and how well they're doing it. And you say, well, that's fantastic. Now you need to open them up to allow others to query or use. I'm trying to make this not only inference based, but it's often the easiest one, as I say, to use as an example. So for inference based, you have to allow other people to query them, not just this closed set of prompts and responses that you have that you can test against, that you know how they should perform. Everyone within the network has to be able to use them with whatever prompts and responses, and they have to perform.
So are these, sorry, just want to say, are these normal users? So,
yes.
Right. Okay. So people who use ChatGPT would come and just.
So what we're now doing is we're making the jump from synthetic queries to organic queries. And that's the next step up. And I can count on one hand, with a couple of fingers cut off, the number of subnets that are actively incentivizing and rewarding organic queries, because it's not easy. When you don't know what the question is, how do you grade the answer?
Yeah.
And there's some of this where I think we'd have to listen into, say, Namaray's podcast with BitTensor Guru that he did a couple of weeks ago, where he really goes into this. I am not the person to go into the details of this. I'm the person to explain why it matters. And unfortunately, Namaray couldn't appear on this podcast. So he has prioritized, as we always did from the very beginning, the scoring of organic queries. And it's hugely important. And it's not a secret how he does it. The code is open source. Subnet 19 code is an open source repository. Anyone can go and see how that's done. For inference, they can just literally copy, fork, borrow, steal the code, whatever terminology you want to use, and for other forms of interaction with miners, be inspired by it to adapt it to your use case. So that's the very first thing that it enables them to do. And once you get that right, you then need to incentivize growth and capacity. Because it's all very well to say, well, okay, you can, I'm scoring you for these, and now we can have organic queries. But once you have organic queries and you start to build applications, then you need the miners to essentially provide more and faster and better servers. Because the network needs to grow, and we assume it does, but it's not an assumption. If you're not scoring organic, you're not scoring capacity, you see,
Right.
bandwidth. And so once you start to think about scoring bandwidth, then your network will grow, because the miners that provide more provable bandwidth will have more incentive than those that don't. So the bar starts to go up. Yet they still have to pass quality, speed, checks. And so what happens then is you get this with this distribution curve with the uptick at the end, where a small subset of miners are doing it better. And what happens is that pulls everyone else up. Otherwise, they get kicked off. Because if you can't compete with those who are upping the quality and the infrastructure, you're going to get knocked off, and they're going to continue to expand. So what's happened with 19 is a smaller group, I would say, of miners, let's say 20, I would say 20 at most, but possibly 10 to 12, have really dedicated at the moment their lives. It is what they do. It's one of the healthiest mining communities, and have really invested a lot of time into this infrastructure. I mean, they don't run, I would say none of them run the default mining script anymore. So a subnet puts out a default mining script that says, this is how we advise you to do what it is that we need you to do. A lot of subnets start with that, and then the good miners will modify that, and an exceptional miner will throw it out the window and completely rewrite it and say, well, I can do this better. And that's that has absolutely happened on Subnet 19. The base mining script is absolutely useless. It's not going to get you anywhere. In order for you to perform to the level that's required, you really have to be optimizing and creating your own mining setup. So now you have a successful incentive mechanism. You have organic queries being promoted and scored heavily, and indistinguishable from synthetic queries. So miners have to reply to everyone. And then the next thing you need to do, so then you have bandwidth also being promoted, so that the network is growing. Then you have to think about access. Okay, so we've got this ever-growing network. Who can access it, and how do we meter that access? And this is actually stepping back. This was not the order in which things were done. This part I'm about to explain it was actually done a while ago, the inference at scale. Because as we know with BitTensor, access is governed through validator stake. So validators have access to the network, and they are in concept and in theory should be prioritized by the amount of stake. Simply because the higher stake you have, the greater weight you have, therefore the more important your score carries to a miner. This is what brings about this issue where miners will ignore people with arbitrary small amounts of stake. You need a certain amount of stake for a validator to be noticed, because otherwise it's miners only, I don't say they only care about their incentive, but for this argument, they only care about their incentive.
Sure.
They make decisions as to what is best for the maximization of their incentive. So they'll only reply to those that are rewarding incentive to them. So what we did, or what Subnet 19 did, was devise a mechanism, essentially write what should be done to provide inference at scale. Because how do you divide up bandwidth between a bunch of validators based on their stake without knowing the capacity of the network or the amount of queries that any one of them are putting through? If you go onto the Subnet 19 TAU vision, there's TAU vision.ai, you can read their research papers on this. They're extensive. There's two that explains it. One that explains it in a broader, abstract manner, and another that gets deep into the maths that loses me by about page 4. And they explain how this is done. And what this means is you can then create an open API that all validators can use. And this is a difficult part, because there are many subnets that say, well, okay, we just want to make our subnet accessible. So we're going to create an API, us as subnet owners, and you can all come and get a key or access through it, and we'll make sure it communicates the way we want with the miners. You think, well, that's great in some ways. But what if you, as a subnet owner, decide to route or prioritize or change or do anything to that API, or it goes down? It's a centralized point of failure. Essentially, you're centralizing your API in a decentralized network for the subnet owner. Whereas what should happen is any validator that is validating on that subnet should be able to, on that validator, or in this instance, on a separate machine for security reasons, spin up their own API, generate their own API keys, and essentially build their own core cell, sell their keys, do anything that they want, regardless of what the subnet owner is doing. And it should all work, prioritizing by bandwidth and by stake and bandwidth, completely organically. And that's what 19 has done. I'm just trying to think of it. Yeah, so I haven't quite finished it yet. It gets better. So
yeah, I just want to interrupt for just a second. I just have a question about this. So I'm listening to this, and I know the point of BitTensor is to create a truly open AI that anyone can use. But I'm also hearing you say that the subnets can only be accessed by people who are validators who have staked TOW, right? So what about Joe Public? Can Joe Public just come and use these things? It sounds like no.
Yes, if Joe Public wants to access or build on any subnet, they should use a core cell API key or an API key or access from any validator. So can anyone anywhere just go and start querying miners? No. Because it would make it too easy to DDoS miners.
Yes.
It's a security, it's an access thing. Miners need to be incentivized to respond. Therefore, the prompts or the questions or the access needs to come from the validators, because they have the ability to reward for the responses.
Got it. So if I'm so basically a validator would be the entity which hands out API keys to other people, and then hopefully collect some money.
I mean, at the moment, the only one that's really doing this publicly is CoreCell through the TauSats CoreCell validator. I know OpenTensor are building up their own version of CoreCell, essentially API access to various subnets. I know BitTensor Guru Keith, he offers and works with direct sort of business to business with access to his validator. I'm sure there's some other validators doing it. Some strike up agreements with subnet owners themselves. Every validator is approaching it in their own unique way, shall we say.
Got it.
So that's why. So that basically, in many ways, when I speak to new subnets, is my tick-off criteria list. Does your incentive mechanism work? Can your commodity or data be accessed by anyone? Are you scoring organic inference, depending on, or no, if it's not inference, organic usage for your subnet? Do you have an API for your subnet? Is it decentralized? And these are not easy problems to solve. And Namare has gone through and ticked them off sort of one by one with a bunch of other stuff on the side. And then you come to this question, you think, well, I've done that. That's great. Now I want to make my subnet do more. Should I just create new subnets? Or is there a more optimum way of going about this? And this obviously now Subnet 19 does text and image and text to speech, speech to text, in painting. I think there's about 10 different, and this is why I'm going to bring this word into it, tasks. What Subnet 19 created was the ability to have tasks. Because if you start asking miners to do a lot of things, you can't expect them to be good at everything. Mm-hmm. And this is I'll talk about this and how it relates to other subnets away from 19 in a minute, and what it is we're trying to stimulate and grow within BitTensor. And that is, if you don't expect, you can't expect a miner to be good at everything, especially if incentive is not where you want it to be. So emissions, this is going to be a problem with a lot of subnets, I think, coming up, where they say, well, we need to encourage and incentivize our miners to perform a certain amount of tasks. But we don't have enough emissions because either we haven't been given enough emissions, or TOW price is not high enough, or it's going down. A bit like Bitcoin miners have to turn off some of their miners to do what it is that we want them to do. And so what tasks do is they allow miners to choose the tasks that they want to perform, and the incentive to be split between the tasks. So you might say, right, we're going to give 20% to text to text, like LLM responses. We're giving 15% to text to image. We're giving 10% to text to speech. We're going to give 5% to in-painting, 15% to avatar generation, and we split that across the subnet. At the moment, that's defined by the subnet owner, that split, but eventually it will be defined by demand, or some kind of DAO mechanism.
And the DAO would be just within that subnet.
Yeah, I mean, a DAO would still be, it has to be demand-based. It has to be a natural organic market, really, for it to work. Where the demand is what will incentivize the value of those tasks and essentially the miners to step up. If you have someone that comes in and says, I've got 50 million avatars to create, you want your miners to step up to provide increased avatar services. If you don't have demand for other services, then they can step down their infrastructure for that. So what happens is, although some miners can be good at all if they want to, that generally would be a higher cost for them. So their profit scale would be smaller. But miners can decide to operate on a certain number of tasks. Also, again, dependent on demand for the tasks. And their incentive score is a combination of the amount of bandwidth they're able to serve, how well they perform the tasks that they have said they would over a period of time, whether they provide the capacity that they've said they would over a period of time. And all of these are then brought together to give them an overall score. So if you do incredibly well on 5 out of 10 tasks, you stand a chance of potentially outscoring someone who performs a mediocre job on all 10.
Okay.
And what this means is essentially this subnet currently performs the job of 6 or 7 subnets.
Yeah, so it sounds to me when you describe tasks, they do, in my mind, sound like subnets, right? So you can you can infinitely split up your subnet and create your own little BitTensor universe within your subnet, which that sounds awesome. I love it.
Well, Namare likes to use the analogy of BitTensor being a high street and each subnet being a shop. And you walk down, you look in the window, and you see what it's selling. And Subnet 19 being a mall. You get there, and suddenly it's a mall, and inside are a whole bunch of shops doing a whole bunch of things. And in some ways, it's almost, when it comes to things like emissions, it's overwhelming. People don't quite understand everything that can be done or what's inside, and it's easier for them to digest a singular shop or a single window. But I think we have to make sacrifices and decisions between bettering a network or just going after the easy money, the quick sale, the lowest hanging fruit of incentive. And I think that's really what Subnet 19 is doing. Now, there is a natural limit. There is a psychological limit to it. I believe that there is only so much that a network will admit that they want to. I mean, we don't want monopolies. It was something I remember discussing with Const a very long time ago. He was always very much against any kind of monopoly within a network, which I think is, we need competition. Subnet 19 needs competition. So this is what brings me on to the next part. The reason why I kind of wanted to come on this podcast was primarily not to talk about 19. I feel like Namare has spoken about it a lot, and he speaks about it better than me. But what I want to speak about is what 19 should be doing and providing as a step up for other subnets. Currently, in what are we now? We're now in December last year, and when subnets became a thing, or really started to take sort of build up momentum. Most people were basing their subnets off the OpenTensor subnet template. It was just a subnet template released that was sort of a stripped back version of Subnet 1, and it very quickly became outdated. And the problem is there are still new subnets coming along who are using that as a template. And anyone in the foundation, anyone was saying, no, you shouldn't be building subnets like that. That's an old way of building subnets. So what 19 is trying to do is to make people aware of what all these sort of modular building blocks are, And then what we're trying to do as a validator, someone who provides emissions as TAU stats, is to step up the network, essentially raise the bar for subnet development, because we need more talented developers and engineers coming into the network. And when they do, the building blocks we need to give them need to be here, not from here. And everyone should be starting from here and building up. It's just, we should all be standing on the shoulders of those who have succeeded and come before us to essentially fast track the learning process, but also grow at a more an exponential rate. So that's really why I want to put not just focus on 19, but focus on directing emissions towards subnets that are really doing that are growing and are building and are fostering competition. Because incentivizing growth and talent on the network is really the priority that I have as Mog Machine, as TAU Stats, and it's a position that I find myself in. And the reason that we then need to do this is we need to educate as many people as possible as to what a subnet is, where its value lies, because in the not too distant future will come this next evolution of BitTensor, DTOW. And what DTOW will do is put
dynamic TAU is what DTOW stands for.
DTOW is dynamic TAU, which essentially means a synthetic token or representation of a token for each subnet, where every single holder of the TAU token will have the ability to exchange or essentially obtain and choose to obtain the synthetic equivalent of a subnet token, and they will be incentivized to do so based on perceived value and growth of that subnet. So what that means is right now, one of the hardest parts of my job is to be able to, or is the need to look at subnets, all 45 of them, and assign value, percentage. We have 100% of emissions, 7,200 TAU per day. And every validator has to decide how that is split across 45 subnets and then also a root subnet if they don't want to give all to any of the subnets. And that role is often criticized, and it's very easy to criticize. And I'll be honest, with due course, there are validators that have bias. There are validators that don't justify why they set the emissions that they do. It's easy to criticize, yet at the same time, there are validators that are trying so hard to get it right and to grow the network. And at the same time, will admit that it's not an easy job. For anyone, it's not an easy job for the foundation with their background. It's not an easy job for me, who have done everything in my power to try and forward and grow the network. Keith will admit, that's not his background to be able to analyze these deeply technical subnets. So what happens is we fall into cynicism, being exposed to hype, being exposed to pressure. It becomes a lobbying campaign. So you have to be able to identify the value and understand what a subnet is and what makes it valuable, because even you, Mark, will need to decide whether you are just going to not engage with DTOW, and at which point your TAU will reward you less, or engage with DTOW and stand to benefit and grow your TAU through the right decisions. Or although I have to be careful as I say this, because the latest proposal of DTOW is not out, but essentially it will be more profitable to engage with DTOW. And of course, if you have the ability to maximize profit by engaging, you also have the ability to minimize profit. You will need to identify value in subnets if you.
Okay, so let me try to repeat it back to you. So, dynamic TAU, it's sort of like TAU is the NBA. Dynamic TAU, all the subnets are basketball teams. One of them's the Lakers, and so I can take my NBA token and change it into Laker tokens. And if the Lakers win the championship, then I make a lot more TAU than if I just staked regular TAU. So, but if I pick a loser team, then I will make less than I would have made if I just hung on to my NBA TAU tokens, right? It's like that.
100% correct. That it is not confirmed that that's the exact way the mechanism will work, but that is the way it's intended. And there's more complications, more detail to that, in that the emissions of a subnet, how much the miners, the validators, and the team get, will be defined by the people that want to buy the Laker token. So the more people that get Laker token, the more money the Lakers get.
Okay.
Now, in particular instance, we want a league to be fair, but in the BitTensor sense, we want to encourage growth. So we want to back the best teams. And so just leaving that up to chance it will benefit those that know, but what we really have an obligation to do is to educate everyone and provide the tools in order to do so. So as Tau Stats, we're coming up with a new initiative. I can't tell you anything too much about it at this particular moment, but even the name and title is not 100% sure. But because the issue at the moment is, where do I learn about subnets? Where do you learn about subnets? Go to the Discord. Go and follow all their channels on Discord. As one of the most active members of the BitTensor community, I physically cannot be in every Subnets Discord and know everything that's going on. The only people that are really in a Subnet Discord, and I say this as a validator who needs to be, are the miners, people that find issues, exploits, or we need to contribute, or those that are heavily involved in that particular subnet. It's impossible for everyone to be. So it's impossible to find out all the news. Obviously, the messages flash by in a day. So we are trying to make all of that data available. We are trying to actively engage with subnet owners and validators to justify weight, to explain why emissions, to justify emissions, to explain why emissions are given, to explain why emissions are removed, to explain what it is that we want from subnets. Essentially, I take it back to, I really missed being a teacher. Many, many years ago, I was a university lecturer.
No way.
Yeah, it helped ease the transition from wanting to be freelance and being freelance with clients. So I did about 4 years teaching in a university in London. It was amazing. It was a really, really great time in my life, and it set the ball rolling for. I put out 4 or 5 years worth of students who then spent the next 20 years bringing in work from all of the agencies that they went off and worked for. So it was actually a fantastic investment in my own future. And I like to feel an investment in a lot of people's future. And when you're a teacher in a class, you don't look at the bottom percentile of the class and just look at them and go, you guys won't make it, it's fine. I'm just going to concentrate on the guys that are good. And sometimes you may want to, and that may help, but it's not what you do as a teacher. It's not the right thing to do for the time. You have an obligation as an educator to foster and provide the feedback and tools and input to try to give everyone the best chance for them to grow. Right. If one member of that class gets eliminated every week for being the weakest, well, that's a mechanism. What can I do? Which, of course, is how BitTensor works. But we have an obligation not just to say, well, they're rubbish, I'm not giving them any points, any emission. You have to explain why. You have to give people a chance, because then, there's no recourse when you reduce emissions, when you say that you haven't lived up to this potential. We've explained, it's been said, you've had a chance to, and especially when there's a lot of criticism. Subnets often receive criticism from people outside the upper circle. Now, it doesn't mean they're sort of a closed sort of circle of validators or participants of the network. Now, that doesn't mean that their criticism is any less valid, but it can easily be ignored, because if you voice it on a subnet Discord, the miners who are benefiting from that subnet will always usually defend the subnet owner. I mean, it's a complicated thing. So what we're trying to do is to provide a voice to all and a source of education on the state and value of subnets within the network.
Okay. So thank you for all of that. It was very, very elucidating. So let's move on now to some of the sort of more current events stuff. So we've seen Meta open source their model, and they're not the only ones. We've seen other people do this, and I'm not the expert in this, so I'm just sort of going off of what I've read in the news. But from what I can tell, it looks like there's a number of open source models that are every bit as good as ChatGPT and whatever OpenAI is producing. And when this whole AI thing first, kind of rose up out of the pavement, I saw Jason Calacanis at a launch event that he put on in Silicon Valley. He's like, "Hey, Mark Jeffrey, you should pivot from crypto to AI." And I thought about it for a couple weeks, and when I looked around, my impression was nobody's going to benefit from as a angel investor. I'm not going to be able to find an AI company. The benefit is going to all accrue to the very large and the very centralized, and startups can't really compete. And that actually has not turned out to be the case with all these open source models. However, what the trend seems to be is that there's been a shitload of money sort of poured into these AI companies, but they're not able to return on that investment because the open source models are they just keep eating the lunch of these things that are ventured backed. That's what it looks like to me. And I've noticed Chamath Palmatier on a recent episode of All In start talking about BitTensor. And it feels like he his gaze sort of has shifted to BitTensor because he's like, oh shit, I think kind of the angel invest in company model isn't really working for AI, but this BitTensor thing seems to be. So what is your reaction to that? Do I have that right? And what do you think of that trend?
Well, absolutely, open source is catching up to closed source, and a lot of us feel will surpass it in the very not too distant future. That's a given. Can I call OpenAI the AOL of AI? Are we allowed to do that? You're old enough to understand what I'm talking about. Some people might have to go look it up.
The kids won't get it, but they produce, or the MySpace.
They produce what we all needed to raise public awareness of what an LLM is, what inference is, etc., etc. But the internet is the internet, and open source is open source, and the power of open source and the power that we have in the last 10, 15 years of the collective to better something will just naturally promote and empower open source to do better. And Mark Zuckerberg is obviously a highly intelligent man who saw this. And so where this is very interesting, obviously with the Llama models being open source, is the difficulty then becomes how do you profit from open source? Yes. Because of course, it's very easy to say, and this is where the VC money that's pouring into a lot of these AI startups is essentially being spent on GPU to allow them to provide all of this inference and all of these resources for free or next to nothing. With the WhatsApp's tactic, you just onboard everyone and we'll figure out how we make money later. So many tech startups, which is actually not something I particularly have always enjoyed or aligned with. Now, I've never been the head of a large tech startup. I almost sometimes don't believe that suddenly I do seem to be. And we always were very proud that we were focusing on being revenue positive in what we were doing and not needing to take on this VC funding to what would we do with it at this point? We'd probably just have bought TAO. We joked about this a long time ago with an angel investor that wanted to invest in us just over a year and a half ago. And we flat out said to them, we said, look, if you gave us money now, would literally buy TAO. And I think at that point, TAO was at about $40 or something like that. And we said, this offer is only valid if we can close this before TAO gets to about 80. And then in the end, everything changed. And I'm not going to say who it was because I'm still in close contact with them. And they'll smile if they hear this, but it became just a de facto non-starter. So once you then have to work out how you make your money from open source. And this is difficult. But at the same time, once you bring open source onto BitTensor, is it costing you money in that same way to provision? And that's the difference. You look at, I'm going to say someone like Grok, who's providing free inference, not Grok, Twitter Grok, the other one that's
with the Q.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they've got a lot of VC funding, and they probably will be profitable one day, and they're spending all their money on their GPUs, and Corcel wants to be competing and benchmarking with them. We want to be surpassing them. There are also things like Together AI, and I feel that we will. But we've had to build up there slowly, and do it empowered by BitTensor. And BitTensor has empowered us to do this. Whether Chamath sees sees this kind of organic growth of something sustainable. I think that's always the thing, isn't it? When you're pouring in your funding money, when the market becomes saturated, it's very difficult to pick a winner. And VCs want to win, and they'll bet on 3 out of 10 horses. But when you've got 100 horses, it becomes very, very hard. Their bet needs to be substantial enough, and we've passed that initial phase. I would say a year and a half ago, where any of the AI startups you could throw 100 million at and hope that it turns into 400 million. And can you get it out now? I don't know. It's still there in the valuation. I'm not a VC, thankfully, but it's an interesting scenario. We see it in crypto. Why are alts not following Bitcoin? Because just the pure saturation of the market by the number of new coins and startups and tokenization is just mind blowing. And so, where do you invest? I feel that's probably why BitTensor. Yeah, I mean, there are teams who are receiving funding, I'm sure, within the BitTensor network, but it's not an obligation. You don't need to be hugely well funded. I know you said at the beginning, there's this path to getting the TOW to register a subnet. To register a subnet, your TOW is locked. It's unlocked when you lose your subnet or dissolve your subnet. But if you have a strong subnet idea, you can find someone who will, potentially for a small cut or for the growth of the network, will fund your registration. It's funny, at TAOstats we say we don't do it. We tried in the beginning, and it's just a big conflict of interest. But I have to say, I have not, those that come asking for me to fund that, fund the TAO, have never had a strong enough idea to make it a difficult decision for me to say no. I'm pretty sure those with the strong ideas don't want to share emissions. They, by hook or crook, will find the way to get the TOW, whether it's through whatever it is they need to do. Anyone that understands the potential of a strong idea within the network would fund it. I know there are other validators out there who are funding subnets, and look, everyone needs to make their own choices. I just think eventually you get called to justify, are you setting higher emissions because you are part of this subnet and directly profiting from it, or are you setting an honest set of weights? Which, of course, pot calling the kettle black, as a company of TAOstats is. But and it's been said. Everyone knows, because I've said it a million times over. We are psychologically capped as TAOstats as to what we can value Subnet 19 as, because we cannot go above what disproportionately above what the network. What the other participants of the network is, what the consensus is. With everything they've come out recently, we have once again upped our emissions for Subnet 19, but we have to keep it within a.
You have to be reasonable. You have to be objective as you can. Your ultimate
goal.
No,
if I was objective, it would be much higher. I have to not be objective and just toe the line, because a consensus is more important. It's better for me to educate all participants of the network as to why I think something is valued more than I'm valuing it, so that they may also start to value it higher, than to just say, I don't care what you think, you just don't get it. This is what it should be valued. DTOW will fix this. So it's better to educate at the moment, as many people as possible to make their own objective choices when DTOW comes into play.
Do we have a launch date for DTOW yet, or is that still sort of, we just don't know? Soon.
Certain aspects of it could literally be pushed live tomorrow. Obviously, this is out of my remit. It's an Open Tensor Foundation. But certain aspects of it could go live tomorrow. But then other sides of it to do with its classification, how it's structured from a legal concern point for teams operating within the space. Just some of the intricacies are being ironed out, so a proposal can be put forward that can actually be voted on or implemented. We had the initial proposal of DTAU that was, I would personally say, rushed through, and then it was made clear that was not a finalised proposal. That was an idea. Then an interim kind of STTOW version was toyed with, and then decided it wouldn't be beneficial. And there's been so much going on in the network and work on DTOW in the background that I think all of these mechanisms and all of these details need to be just ironed out, decided on. I have to be careful because I'm not allowed to say this. I don't think it's my position to say too much. You need to do a space with someone from the foundation. Jacob would be a great person to have on to talk about this. But I feel like when it's ready, the proposal will be put there and it shouldn't be rushed. If you ask me off the top of my head, as an independent person, to guess when I think DTOW will come into play, I would say people would like to hope and think and aim for Q4 this year, but I think aiming for Q4 this year is more likely to be Q1 next year.
Got it. Okay, so we have rough arrivals.
Could be wrong. That's just my feeling.
Just a guess. Got it. So let me ask you about something else. So I think that investing in centralized AI startups, that seems to not be working. However, what you are doing is working, but that has also attracted the attention of VCs. And I read just yesterday that there's a new Peter Thiel-backed BitTensor clone called Sentient AI, and they've implemented it on Polygon of all chains. So first of all, have you heard about it? Have you heard about this?
I've heard of it. I heard about Sentient a while ago, and I think I posted an offhand remark on Twitter when it was I think it was a month or so ago. And there was something like, thanks guys, or thanks for letting us join this club. It was a very closed club of sort of VCs, so you can see how that's going to go. Internally now, since this announcement, I think it was 24 hours ago, it has been discussed on some closed groups that I take part in.
There's sort of like the
Solana point of view, we don't feel Polygon is the best solution. It's not the only BitTensor clone. There's another one also. It's called Hypertensor, which is also on the rise, or we've also been discussing. I feel like you'll always get the clones.
Sure. No, I think this is great. I think this is outstanding for you guys, because I think you guys are like sort of the Bitcoin or the Ethereum, right? So you organically arose and are sort of run like Bitcoin or Ethereum, whereas this looks like the Solana, right? Which, it'll be big, and it'll actually help drag up the entire space of decentralized AI. So I think ultimately it's a great thing for you. It's just, sort of the players will be different, and it's going to be the VC, old boys club like it always is, right? On that side of the fence.
I think that the talent that BitTensor attracts will hold more value to BitTensor in the long run than the talent that just dangling shiny gold coins and VC funds will attract to a network. You can. I don't want to slate any networks development community, because I don't think that's fair or justified. But I feel like there's a reason this community exists around BitTensor, and it evolves. It's not the same community as when I got involved over 2 years ago, and it's not the and it's constantly evolving. But it's there's something special about it, which I think people feel. And I know that sounds like an echo chamber. It sounds stupid.
No, not at all.
Our community is special. Our network is special. But the intellectuals involved.
It's got heart.
Yeah.
It's got heart. You can't fake heart. Like, I think things like Bitcoin definitely is a big orange heart, right? And I think Ethereum's got a big heart too. Yeah. I think Solana also has some heart in a way, but it is more of a mechanical beast, more machine now than man, right?
I'll let you
feel
say
the lack of heart. I'm going to say it, right? Yeah. It has less heart. It just does.
It's a love for what's not quite perfect, and a desire to help improve it and make it so, rather than just a desire to extract whatever you can personally from something. And I feel that's what tends to be the inherent overruling nature of some of these other networks. Is it's just about value extraction for the individual. And I'm not going to say that doesn't exist for a number of participants within BitTensor, but what BitTensor is trying to do, which is almost a global thing, how can we incentivize and guide the inhabitants of this planet and of this network to want to and to do better for everyone and everything around them naturally. Because that's the thing that they are incentivized to do. That's the natural progression through market forces, through human forces. That's just where we're being guided. And yeah, it's something that I privately feel quite strongly about. It's something that's always been on my mind ever since hearing about citizen scores in China all those years ago. And then everyone goes, "Oh, that's terrible." And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great if you take away the sort of Orwellian state of CCTV everywhere, if you just got like little points for picking up trash off the floor and putting it into a can, cities would be tidy. Homeless people could run around and just pick up the trash and be like, yeah, that's. I mean, obviously, this is a very, very, very. But it was, how does incentivization work? And it actually came from all those years ago of loving the concept of closed torrent sites, that you could only access the torrents if you had a seed ratio higher than 1.1 or whatever it was. It was just like, look, we'll give you more, but you've got to be contributing first.
Yeah. No, I think I love the idea actually of a positive social credit score instead of a negative one. So that's a great idea. So yeah, kudos to you. So going back to the teal thing for a second, they implemented it on Polygon, and this has been a thought that has arisen in my head several times, and this just made it arise again. Why is there anything in particular about BitTensor which requires you to have your own blockchain for TOW, right? Because like they implemented it on Polygon, so clearly implementing on another chain, you can do it. The answer that popped in my mind was, well, but you couldn't do the Yuma consensus, which is inside, deeply embedded in the BitTensor chain, and I think that's the answer. But what is your reaction to that?
Well, I've closed Telegram, so I can't cheat and go and bring up some of the comments of some of the my peers who know more about implementing on Polygon. But it was, as people have said, as you said, it will succeed. Whether it will succeed in the way that BitTensor and the dynamics of it, and it's been discussed that Polygon is possibly not the optimum solution for this. But I think because I've stood there and said, the actual flow of intelligence on BitTensor isn't through the blockchain. The blockchain is not a limitation. It's the incentive mechanism and the incentive landscape that functions on the chain. And technically, that could function on any chain. The reason that Substrate was chosen, and in fact, in the early days, they wanted to do parachain on Cosmos, and we won the auction for it, and then decided not to, was the flexibility. The way that the chain is structured and constantly changing, you really want inherent flexibility, which potentially operating on a pre-existing chain doesn't provide. Now, Substrate's not perfect, and the design of the subtensor, which is the blockchain aspect of BitTensor, isn't perfect. But the speed with which you can improve and modify and build and better it, because of the choice of building on Substrate, not tying it to a specific chain per se, in the pre-existing chain, gives you a lot more freedom. And that was why OTF didn't want to go down the parachain route, and they wanted to maintain as much freedom as possible in terms of how you can mold the chain. You think about it now, and this was back in the day when you had one network. Now we've got 45 subnets. What happens when we have 1,000 or an infinite amount?
Yeah, super cool. Well, Moog, I think we're coming up on the hour here. Is there any final words that you have or anything you want to plug? Where can people find you online, all that stuff?
I probably, as we did start off talking about Subnet 19, should drop a little teaser for Mode, the new multimodal chat or inference interface that Subnet 19, that's Subnet 19, that powered by Subnet 19 that Corsair is coming out with. You can sign up for beta access through the Discord, or it should be out in about a week or so, and it basically does everything. Forget having a GPT replacement. It replaces GPT, Midjourney, 11 Labs, almost everything within one interface, and
wow.
should be really, really cool.
So that will that be publicly available, or will I need to?
You could get on Discord and get yourself. If you shoot me your email afterwards, I'll get you beta access. And then
Ah,
when you go to Corcel, beta.corcel, you'll get it up automatically. But I think we've been about a week and a half, 2 weeks into beta testing, so it will be live very, very soon, and it will essentially replace the Corcel chat as you currently know it.
yeah, I'd love to. I would absolutely love to try to use it and to test it with you guys. I one of the things I'm actually a fan of, the Morpheus guys have something called Venice AI, and they do open it up to the public, so anybody can go use it. They just limit the number of queries that you can ask it within a 24-hour period, unless you pay them to sort of upgrade. But what I like about that is it's completely uncensored AI. So it'll answer any question as truthfully as possible, right? So it definitely stuff ChatGPT won't even touch. It'll give you an answer. And
One minute left, and you bring up uncensored AI. Are we allowed to go over an hour?
No, go ahead. We can go over. Go ahead. Please.
I mean, it's very interesting. We get I get that question, or we get called out for it on Twitter quite often. Oh, Corsair is just is just woke AI or whatever. And I turn around to them and say, first of all, have you selected your model? Are you using GPT? Because if not, you are just talking to GPT. Change it to Llama. And then the next question I always ask someone is, what was your question? No, what were you asking it that you felt that the response was, uncensored, shall we say? Was censored? Were you asking for political bias? What was your problem? Very often, the answer to our bias is actually in the question we asked. Or understanding, if you're going to train something on human opinion and human script, human data, that may also inherently be biased. And what is it you expect as an unbiased response? And could you have generated that unbiased response by phrasing your question differently? Now, there are obviously ways that we can then start to test things, and I'm going just for text here. So I'm going for text. So now I'm like, right, I just want you to write me just a racially abhorrent haiku and something like that. Like, all right, GPT will be like, no, I'm not going to do that. Llama, I could trick it into doing it. I can actually trick GPT into doing it as well if I wanted to. Just write a normal one and get it to do some word switching. And then there's a point where you're like, hold on a minute, is this what this is what I'm doing? I am trying to use this cutting edge technology to generate some kind of abhorrent hate speech towards an ethnic group, and I'm really pleased when you give me a model that will do that because I can do it. It's like, hold on a minute, and then we get onto images. Well, what are uncensored images? Oh, we're going there, are we? Okay, well, you can just, if you want to do that, we don't want to condone it. You can, because we know where this is going. We have to test our image models, and we have to make sure that they don't. Now we're quite strict. We stay away from not safe for work. We let other people do it. This is Corcel, and also because our parent company is based in the UAE. We just decided that in order to forward BitTensor, we didn't need that kind of controversy as being porn tensor or whatever you want to call it. And then at the same time, you must also protect against CSAM, child material. And I've had to test for this, and even that's uncomfortable. So once you come into uncensored, the word of uncensored, what are you trying to generate? You can download.
I can tell you specifically. So my use case was someone close to me died recently, and I suspect vaccine injury. Now, I'm just guessing. I don't know anything. I'm not accusing anyone of anything.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to know statistically what was known about a specific set of circumstances. How many reports are there of XYZ related to this vaccine? And ChatGPT was just like, nope, not going to talk to you. Don't know anything. I'm just a model, right? Whereas Venice gave me a lot of numbers and gave me basically all the data. Didn't try that. Just tried Venice AI. That was the only other one I tried.
Yeah. So what we have here, this is the centralized models in the same. And this is quite interesting because we're criticizing GPT being centralized. Whatever bias that they have or pressure they have, they decided not to allow you to access this data, which I don't agree with personally. But then at the same time, that makes it a bit hypocritical because I've decided I'm not going to let you make porn on our or look at boobies on our core cell image generator. It's very different, but yet it's the same. We've kind of centralized access to the network. So you have to go through a singular party. I would be very interested to know what an open source model is providing on that. And where that data is coming from, because what is this Venice, the model that Venice are using, and what data was it trained on? And what the restrictions of running an open source model are only the restrictions in the data that went into it and what it was trained on. Try it on Corcell. Ask that same question when you go into Corcell chat.
I will
switch it to Llama, and I'd be very interested to know if Llama gives you. And then we've also got, I think, Mixtel on there. You can switch to the models and see which ones. If they're all completely closed off and versus Venice, and I would be interested to look into it.
I will do that. Thank you once again, Mo. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming back on.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, my name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you all next time.